What is up, guys? I am excited. As you know, the hair has been changed, and as of this moment, I think, I could be wrong, but I think I only have one winner who guessed it way back when. If I'm wrong, take a screenshot, email me showing that it was before, 1:16 p.m. on May 5th, and I will hook you guys up with your prize. I hope you are doing well. I hope you guys are getting towards the final stretch here and staying motivated to keep school at the forefront, and I hope we can wrap things up nicely as we finish up our year here in a few weeks. Before I get started, I really wanted to say thank you. I had so many emails from different students, past and present. I even had a student for teacher appreciation literally come to Denton to drop something off to me, and that was probably one of the coolest experiences that I've had in my teaching career. A lot of times we teachers hear that, you make an impact, but it was pretty cool seeing that amount of effort and time spent on doing something nice and a nice gesture. So thank you so much for the kind words. We teachers do what we do, not for all of the showering praises, not for all of the nice words said to us, not for all of the little coffee mugs that we may get for Christmas or for winter break, but we do it for you, and I hope you understand that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys keep being you. I will keep being me. I know my hair looks ridiculous. However, let me tell you my rationale. Let me explain a couple things for you before we go ahead and get started. Let me figure out my chair. One thing I've noticed since being a teacher is, man, the haircuts kids get these days, they're great. Like fades, undercuts, like nice angles. Good stuff, good stuff. I envy you. The reason why I chose like towhead blonde, it's not quite platinum, but it is like bleached. I literally bleached my hair, is because I used to look like this. So, without further ado, before we get started, let's take a little walk through memory lane and enjoy the horrendous haircuts of one Mr. Hanson. Here we go. This one's my personal favorite. We'll get to that in a second. Here are some of my pictures growing up as a child. Yes, my hair was that color until I was just younger than you. These are my elementary school pictures. I think the oldest I am in these photos is a 5th grader. But I want you guys to I want you to realize how good you have it. This might be my favorite and least favorite haircut of all time. If I could draw a line across my forehead where my bangs are, you would see this is not straight. This is not a straight haircut. This haircut is curved. It is bent. You'd also see down here, what is this? Right here. This hair is straight up just longer than all of the others. Do you want to know about why that is? My father would quite literally, this is not a bowl, this is a disc golf disc. I like disc golf. Put a bowl on my head and cut around it. 1990s, I swear, were the decade of the bowl cut. So, next time you get a bad haircut, or you think you have a bad haircut, I just want you to think of this. You're lucky. It could get worse. Let's get started. Again, if you guessed platinum blonde or super, super, super blonde, go ahead, take a screenshot, send it to me, and I will hook you guys up with your present. This week, we are talking about the civil rights. And the civil rights is very, very, very impactful, and it's very important, specifically to a lot of people. And I can make the case that it should be important to everyone, because throughout human history, we have been progressing little by little by little to make things more equitable, not for small groups of people, but for large groups of people. Let me pause here, let you guys think for about 5 silent seconds. Do you think we are equal now between men and women, between religious affiliations? Do you think that we're equal based on how we're paid? Do you think we're equal based on the color of our skin? Take 5 seconds and think in 2020, are we equal? Okay. Now, I'll make the case that we're more equal now than we ever have been, but we're still rather unequal and we still have a long ways to go. So when we talk about civil rights, the first thing I want you to do is think about, what does civil rights mean? And I always like to give you guys the definition: the rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. So, the rights of citizens to be socially free and equal. What does that mean? Well, that means that I can be treated equally in many different circumstances and in many different environments. One thing I get really excited about teaching this age of kids is it's about at this age, within the next few years, at least this is how it worked for me and a lot of my peers, I started paying attention to the world around me when I got to about your guys' age. A little older, maybe. I started looking at the news, reading the news, talking to friends about things I saw on TV that weren't just, Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z. By the way, I'm over level 9,000 right now for those Dragon Ball Z fans. This is like straight up a Super Saiyan haircut. I would love hearing and seeing and reading and finding out examples about things that were applicable to the world around me. So when we learn about civil rights, I always urge my students not just to think about Dr. Martin Luther King. He is incredibly important. One of my heroes, one of many people's heroes, one of the most noteworthy names in history. When people hear Martin Luther King, most of the time they know what his name is associated with. His name is associated with the civil rights movement and a fight for nonviolent protest. I know that it's kind of like a fight for nonviolent. I should say a struggle for equality through nonviolent protests. So, our discussion question today is: teach someone, a family member, a friend, or anyone, a few things that you learned today about MLK. We're going to go further in depth later this week about some of his policies and some other policies for other influential civil rights leaders, such as Malcolm X. We'll talk about him tomorrow. We'll talk about actual segregation and civil rights legislation on Wednesday. And on Thursday, we're going to talk about the Freedom Riders, how a group of people came from the north to the south to try to instill change revolving around this issue of civil rights. So let's go ahead and get started. Remember, your goal for today is to teach someone what you learned about Dr. Martin Luther King. Or maybe it's something you previously knew. I started today's class with the Beatles. Revolution. Listen to the first couple of words. People want a revolution. We don't love to change the world. People are the ones that make change. Change does not happen just because. And I have these for later in the week. I'm excited to show you guys some examples in more recent past of peaceful and non-peaceful protests. But we'll go ahead and get to that later this week. It's going to haunt me, guys. This is going to haunt me every single time I see this. But let's go ahead and work on today. Dr. Martin Luther King, his main focus was not only equality for African Americans and equality for all, but the way in which he wanted to achieve it: non-violence through civil disobedience. Can good truly come through civil disobedience? Well, what is civil disobedience? Let's take a look. I didn't have this pulled up before. I apologize. The refusal to comply with certain laws or to pay taxes and fines as a peaceful form of political protest. The refusal to comply. So I don't want you guys getting any ideas, like especially our athletes, when I say, hey, you guys are late, we need to make up for that with some push-ups. I don't want any civil disobedience. I don't want to give you any ideas. What I do want to do, however, is I want to talk about how Dr. Martin Luther King idea of civil disobedience was a very, very, very popular one at the time, but also a very, very, very difficult one to comply with. So we'll go further and further and further this week into it, but for now, let's give you just the gist of who Dr. Martin Luther King was and what made him so noteworthy and why people know his name and know his influence and know his legacy to this day. So he was the leader of the civil rights movement from the mid-1950s until his assassination in 1968. He was a main influencer in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Here we have President Lyndon Baines Johnson signing into law that act. Dr. Martin Luther King was someone who did not like discrimination. Okay? Like most people, if you're being discriminated against, you probably don't like it. So one thing that I always think of, and I think it's really important, is think about ways in which you have been discriminated. Don't go ahead and type it all out and give me a whole list, but I just want you to think internally. How have you been discriminated? Some people are discriminated against more than others. Some people might be discriminated for their height, their weight, their sex, their skin color. What are some ways in which you have been discriminated? Go ahead and think of those and then have those in the back of your mind as you guys are listening to the rest of today's lesson. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed discrimination based on race, religion, sex, or national origin, what country you come from. It prohibited unequal voter laws, employment, public accommodations, and school segregation. So let's talk about this. Prohibited unequal voter laws, employment. Let's talk. Voter laws historically have been incredibly unfair. We know, based on what we've learned when our country was born, one of the main boxes that you needed to check to vote, well, actually, one of a few main boxes you needed to check to vote was you needed to be white and you needed to own land. Throughout history, more and more and more people have been, rightfully so, awarded the right to vote. But voter laws were extraordinarily unequal. Lots of times, they would not let, historically speaking, during different elections, they would, voter segregation laws would be in place where specific groups of people, based on where they live, would not be allowed to vote. And mostly those specific areas that were segregated against had had dense populations of African American residents. So right there, that's a pretty straightforward example of voter law segregation and voter law discrimination. Employment. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 stated you can't be you can't be discriminated against based on employment. So I can't be an employer with one job available and have two great candidates who are super, super qualified and just discriminate against one candidate because maybe they have a belief that I don't like, or maybe because, historically speaking, they didn't hold that job, or they were thought that they couldn't hold that job. So employment is a big one. This is one that we still struggle with today. We've talked in my class about this before. Employment is not equal. Some jobs, it doesn't matter what you look like, where you're from, how tall you are, or any of your characteristics, you're going to be paid the same based on your experience. And a lot of times, those are state jobs that the state pays you for. Governors, mayors, city council men and women, teachers, anyone that the state employs is going to have pretty equal and fair pay because that pay is publicized. You can see it in your papers. You can look it up online. However, if you work in the private sector and you don't work in the public sector, do you think that your employer needs to go ahead and publish all of their payroll? Do you think that someone with 5 years experience and someone with 5 years experience are getting paid the exact same? Maybe yes, maybe no, but probably not. Employment discrimination is huge. We all like to feel secure and comfortable knowing that I am paid based on my worth, not on my appearance. Public accommodations being like restrooms, water fountains, restaurants, and finally, school segregation. Dr. Martin Luther King also founded an organization committed to achieving full equality for African Americans through nonviolent protest. So, these are just a few things about Dr. Martin Luther King. You guys have had an opportunity in elementary school to learn about him. You've heard about him in middle school. You will continue to hear about him in high school, but I want you guys to be thinking this week. Do yourselves a favor. Don't just put your hands in your chin or your chin in your hands and just be like, I have to watch this video. I want you to be thinking to your own experiences, ways in which you have been discriminated against. Chances are there are some of your peers that have been discriminated a lot more or have had discrimination against them a lot more than others. So be thinking, be having those discussions, and go ahead for your assignment. Teach someone today, teach a family member or a friend or someone, through social distance, of course, a few things that you learned about MLK. I hope you guys are doing well. Thank you again for all the kind emails. I miss you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future after what seems to be the longest of summer breaks. Take care. See you next time. Doo-doo-doo.